Alya had the looks, the brains, and the cool attitude to go along with both. It's no wonder that most, if not everyone, couldn't help but admire her. But even someone like her, who rejects guys without batting an eye, gets flustered in front of someone she likes. Whenever Alya is with her classmate Masachika, she often whispers sweet nothings in Russian, confident that he wouldn't understand any of it. But here's the catch. Masachika actually understood every time. Hey guys, Anime Saga Recap is again here to bring you a quality recap video. Also, based on our analytics, about 99% of you have not yet subscribed to our channel. We are still a growing channel, and your subscription will significantly help us. Thanks a bunch in advance, and we hope you enjoy this video. Our story starts as a high school girl makes her way to school, amidst the admiring stares of her schoolmates. Her name is Alisa Mikhailovna Kujo, the half-Russian student council treasurer of the school. Suddenly, a shameless senior named Ando gets in her way. He claims that her sister had been talking about her to him, and that's why he approached her. However, Alisa ignores all his attempts to flirt and criticizes him for wearing a necklace against school rules. Alisa, though, has a good reason for rejecting the dude, and no, it's not because his face screams rejection. It was because she already had someone she liked. That someone just happens to be her seatmate, who is currently sleeping at his desk and ignoring her morning greetings. That she has to resort to violence just to receive it back. She addresses him as Kuze, and the two of them seem pretty close. She even allows him to call her by what seems to be his nickname for her, which is also the name we will address her with from now on. Kuze is an otaku who doesn't mind losing sleep, just so he can watch his shows and talk about it with his friends in the middle of the night. He seems like your everyday slacker, but Alya still finds him cute, which she expresses in Russian. When Kuze asks her what she said, she just tells him that she called him ugly. Alya said so, thinking that he didn't understand her, but actually he did, and it's making things awkward for him. See, Kuze used to have a Russian childhood friend, and over time, he learned the language. Knowing exactly how Alya would react if she did find out, he just can't let himself break it to her. By lunchtime, Kuze was eating with his friends. One of them was overly dramatic about wanting to be popular, and the other was already the popular type and just couldn't care less about the other's sentiments. Anyways, not long after the trio started gossiping about the three beauties of the student council, Yuki and Alya being among them, they invited themselves to their table. Alya's mood started getting sour after she found out that Yuki and Kuze were childhood friends. More so when Yuki moves closer to Kuze as she tries to convince him to join the student council with them. The following day, Kuze woke up early after dreaming about his Russian childhood friend and decided to come to school early. He was the first one to arrive, so he also started tidying up the room. Just as Kuze finished cleaning, Alya arrived. She was surprised that Kuze was actually early for once and commented how some miracle might actually be upon them. As Kuze approached Alya, he realized that one of her socks was soiled. She explained that a truck had accidentally caused it, and it was too late for her to avoid it. Good thing she had a spare one in her locker, so she didn't have to go back home just to get a clean one. As Alya took off the soiled socks, she noticed Kuze standing awkwardly nearby as he tried to not glance her way. This lets her get an idea to tease him by not only having him fetch her socks from the locker, but also having him put it on for her, insisting that he should be happy since it's supposed to be a reward for him. Kuze mumbles that it's only a reward for a certain group of people, which he isn't a part of. However, he takes it back soon after when Alya starts getting impatient and calls him a wimp. Before that, she mumbled in Russian how it's supposed to be a reward for her as well. Kuze started wondering why Alya was mumbling her true feelings in Russian only. One of his theories is that because she's such a perfectionist, and supposedly the impenetrable princess, she just couldn't let her image be tarnished. Eventually, Kuze put on Alya's socks. She was so taken aback that she just couldn't keep still, which led to an awkward situation between them and prompted Alya to accidentally kick Kuze. The day went on with an awkward silence between them, especially for Kuze, who seemed to have developed a foot fetish after the incident. By break time, Kuze couldn't take the awkwardness anymore, so he especially sought out Alya to apologize. By then, Alya had already calmed down and even apologized for kicking him. However, Kuze accidentally slips out that he saw her undies during the commotion earlier, and so a chase commenced all over the school, with Alya being too embarrassed to face Kuze, and Kuze wanting to apologize sincerely. The chase eventually ended, and Kuze offered her a red bean soup drink, which he noticed was what she often buys for herself. The conversation that followed after that mostly consisted of Alya flirting with Kuze in Russian. It was starting to get too much even for him that he considered just confessing. But that's for another time since it's still too early having to deal with another level of awkwardness between them. On another day, Kuze came to the supply room looking for Yuki. He even started fooling around after her instigation. It would have been fine if it had just been the two of them, but as it so happens, Alya was actually in the room and had witnessed everything. She was jealous, all right, to the point that she even said in Russian that Kuzey should also pay attention to her and started chanting for him to talk to her as the three of them proceeded with cleaning and organizing the supply room. Later, after the three of them were done, the girls brought Kuzey to the student council room where he met the current student council president, Kanzaki. He only had praise for Kuzey, and Kuzey, in return, couldn't help but regard Kanzaki highly. Not wanting to stay longer, Kuzey was just about to leave when Kanzaki invited him for a meal to say thanks for his help. Kuzey didn't want to accept the invitation, but after Yuki's irrefutable argument, Kuzey was left without a choice. More so since Kanzaki also invited the girls. And so the four of them found themselves in one corner of a family restaurant. As they waited for their orders to arrive, they started discussing student council work. Yuki praised Kuzey so much that even Kanzaki was surprised. The two of them tried to convince Kuzey to join the student council, but there was just not anything in it for Kuzey. Tension sparked right before the food came. As it turns out, like Yuki, Alya wanted to run for the student council president next year. Fast forward to after dinner. Kanzaki and Yuki were going together on the opposite side, so Kuzey was tasked with walking Alya home. Not long after, once Kuzey got home himself, he noticed a pair of shoes by the entrance. By the time he got inside, a familiar frame of a girl reading a manga was comfortably lounging on the sofa. The girl turned out to be Yuki herself, who isn't only acting so unlike her usual self, but also reveals that she is actually Kuzey's little sister. Well, the childhood friend setup was actually her idea, and Kuzey just went along with it, although it does seem like there were other people who already knew. Anyways, the following day was the weekend, and the two were supposed to be shopping and spending time together, revealing another surprising fact about Yuki. That's to say, she seems to be a bigger otaku than her brother. The two of them later went to the department store, as Yuki had been dying to buy some new clothes. However, Yuki was torn because she was supposed to buy otaku merchandise later, and the clothes she wanted already cost a lot. Speaking of being torn, Kuzey finally mustered the courage to point out the elephant in the room that Yuki herself had noticed following them around ever since they arrived at the floor. The elephant is a silver-haired beauty who is trying her best to hide herself as she spies on the two. Unlike Kuzey, though, Yuki doesn't hesitate to have the elephant show herself. Yuki called out to Alya, and Kuzey once again had no choice but to go along with his sister's antics. After awkward pleasantries, Yuki suddenly invites Alya to have lunch with them. Kuzey initially protested, which made Alya want to come along more. But see, Kuzey protests for Alya's sake. It seems like the two of them were going to have lunch at a ramen restaurant that specializes in super spicy blends, and it's on the level that Alya couldn't really handle. But what's done is done, and the least that he could do for Alya was to go ahead and choose the least spicy dish. However, all thanks to Yuki's prank, their lunch ended with Alya making a fuss over the spiciness of her ramen. After lunch, Yuki wandered off by herself, leaving Kuzey to take care of Alya. They stayed briefly at the park where Kuzey mustered the courage to ask if Alya was really going to run for student council president. The Russian girl seemed pretty determined that she didn't even care if she didn't have a running mate. She did, however, whisper in Russian that if Kuzey would agree, she'd like them to be a team. After a while, Alya invites Kuzey to buy some clothes. Kuzey found it awkward at first, but after realizing that Alya doesn't really have a lot of friends, and that's why she doesn't see the situation as awkward, he decided that it's the least he can do as one of her few friends. Going to a department store for female clothes is bound to get awkward for Kuzey, although he isn't the only one who feels so. Fortunately, Kuzey was such a smooth talker and convincing flatterer that in no time at all, Alya found herself gaining confidence as she tried on different clothes and showed them to him. Well, it could also be due to the fact that she loves hearing her crush compliment her. The fashion show, however, ended abruptly when Alya tried on the most daring piece she had intended to show to Kuzey, only to find out that Yuki had come to get them and was waiting for her to finish. As to why she would feel more embarrassed wearing it in front of a girl than with a guy is beyond this narrator's comprehension. Alya was still so out of it by the time they rode on the subway that she realized too late how Kuzey and Yuki got off at the same station when they were supposed to be living in opposite directions. By the time Alya got home, her older sister Masha, who also happens to be a member of the student council, welcomed her adoringly. Masha immediately noticed that Alya wasn't in the mood and asked about her day. Alya tried to evade any digging, but her sister just knew her too well to notice how the root cause of it all was, because she liked Kuzey, to the point that she's willing to put up with his flippant personality, despite being someone who dislikes unserious people. Going back to Alya's childhood in Russia, Even as a kid, she had always been someone who did her best in everything, and it's upsetting for her to think that others can't put the same amount of effort that she does in theirs. After a failed group assignment that she had actually done her best to complete, Alya decided that since nobody was willing to match her effort, she'd just do everything herself. Years passed, and seasons changed. Alya had transferred to a Japanese high school. It was then that she first met Kuze, who had treated her normally, unlike everyone else, but is also someone who did not take any of their subjects seriously, whether it was science or physical education or math. Alya was appalled. After all, their school was supposed to be very difficult to get into, and yet there's a slacker sitting right beside her who gets away with sleeping in class. Alya's perception of Kuze changed around her first school festival at the school. Their class was supposed to be doing a haunted house. Alya did her best to do her part, even when the rest of her classmates weren't. To her surprise, Kuze had already covered all the bases that were supposed to give them trouble back then. And while he's at it, he even points out how she'd been doing everything wrong. After all, school festivals weren't supposed to be done alone. Days passed, and the preparation for the school festival went smoothly, with Kuze's assistance from behind. Thanks to everyone's efforts, their class even won an award. In the after-party of the school festival, while everyone else was dancing and enjoying themselves, Kuze and Alya started talking on a more personal level. By the end of their conversation, not only did Alya allow Kuze to call her by her nickname that only her family does, Kuze had also rescued her from having been asked out to dance with boys she doesn't really know. Back then, as Kuze pulled her towards the center of the field, Alya felt her heart beating erratically. Since then, the two of them had only gotten closer, and she started complimenting him in Russian. Back to the present, after hearing her story, Masha concluded that it was during that time that Alya started catching feelings for Kuze. Only Alya still insists that that wasn't the case at all. However, after some gadding from her sister, Alya eventually started entertaining the idea. The following school day, Kuze comes into the student council room. As it turns out, he was filling in for Yuki and accompanying Masha to do some shopping. As Masha excitedly introduced herself to her sister's special friend, she suddenly got an epiphany. As the shopping proceeded, Kuze realized just how much Masha and Alya's personalities differed. In fact, they seemed to be the total opposite of each other. Kuze could tell how Alya had a hard time living with her sister. In a shop where Masha was supposed to buy tea, Kuze patiently waited on her. He felt bad that he couldn't help her choose a tea and was suddenly reminded of a memory from when he was a kid, and their parents had decided to get a divorce. Kuze looked so sad that Masha suddenly gave him a hug in an attempt to make him feel better. As for Kuze, for some reason, the feeling he got from the hug was familiar. Once Kuze and Masha returned to the student council office, Kuze could tell from the relief in the president's voice that he hadn't just noticed Masha's behavior. Kenzaki was impressed at how Kuze handled Masha, so he once again tried to ask him to reconsider joining them. But once again, Kuze rejected the offer. Masha then suggested that Kuze just join them on paper, much to Kuze's surprise. He can't understand why they were so intent on having him join. Kenzaki then turns the table and asks Kuze why he's so against joining them when he already had the experience back in middle school. Kuze then explained that he just doesn't have any goal in mind for which this experience would be of any use to him. Kenzaki then tells him that there isn't really a need for such grand goals. After all, he himself first joined the council just so he could get the girls he liked. 2 years ago, he was what one would call a loser. He's on the chubby side, bad at sports, and not even that bright. But he pushed himself so that he could transform into someone who is worthy of being with his current girlfriend, who also happens to be the student council vice president. The point is that, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the motivation is for joining the student council. What really matters is that its members would strive to do their best for the sake of the student body. After such insightful talk from his senpais, Kuze finally seems to reconsider his decision, especially when Kenzaki told him that he could even join as someone's running mate if he so chooses. Speaking of which, Kuze asked them where Alya was. Kenzaki explained that she went off to mediate between the soccer and baseball teams, who wanted to use the field. It seems to be a hard case to resolve, seeing as both have valid reasons and both refuse to back down. Well, Alya was trying her best, but she didn't know how to resolve it. As the two teams started arguing amongst themselves, Alya was also on the verge of crying. Just as she was about to lose all hope, Kuze suddenly appeared, interrupting the arguments. He introduced himself as the student council officer for general affairs who was sent by the president as backup. Going back a few minutes earlier, Kuze initially didn't intend to help out, but after he heard Alya call for help in Russian, he reconsidered. Back to the present, after Kuze established his stand on the matter and suggested a simple course of action, everything was resolved without a hitch. Of course, it was also crucial that the other members were willing to put effort into resolving it and not just rely on the officers to do it for them. Later on, as the two of them started heading back, Kuze apologized to Alya for taking matters into his own hands and without even asking her first. But Alya didn't mind and was just impressed at how Kuze resolved it. As they were about to enter the building, they saw the student council president waiting by the entrance. Kuze knew by then that this was all manipulated by him for Kuze to join them. And it worked. It was already getting late when Alya and Kuze started heading home together. Kuze complained that he didn't like the feeling of having been manipulated by the president, although it was already a done deal. Suddenly, Alya asks him if he joined the council just so he can support Yuki later, once she decides to run for the president position. Testing the waters, Kuze asked her in return of what she would do if that was actually the case. But Alya was never the type to back down, even if all the odds were against her. And so, Alya told him that even if that were the case, and the two of them were against each other, she would still run against him and Yuki. Kuze received her determination well and told her that he actually wanted to support her as her vice president. He'll make sure to help her in everything that she wants to do and never let her be alone. Although there were some mishaps after that dramatic scenario, the point is that it was the start of their partnership. Things have definitely changed between them now. Evidence of that is that Alya let Kuze walk her down to the doorstep of their building and even gave him a smoochie. Alya claims that it's just a simple cheek kiss, but for some reason, Kuze thinks it's not as simple as that. And for once, he wishes that Alya had actually whispered in Russian what she really felt at the moment. When Kuze finally got home, he was surprised to see Yuki's shoes by the entrance. Realizing that Yuki was actually in on the plot to get him to join the student council, Kuze was about to confront her as she opened the room where he thought she was in, only to find her inside in her birthsuit. But since this was not that kind of shoujo anime, it didn't cause so much drama. Plus, Yuki was really pranking her brother. Later that evening, the two were in Kuze's room. As Yuki blow-dried her hair, she asked whether their senpai's plot worked or not. Kuze admitted that it did work and that he's now joining the student council. But contrary to what she might have hoped, Kuze had decided to help support Alya in her presidential candidacy. Kuze had expected Yuki to get upset. Fortunately, her reaction was better than he thought. She even started joking about how Alya's E-cup won over her C-cup. Anyways, she assured him that it was fine even if he decided to support someone else, since whatever happened, she knew that he still loved her a lot. The next day, Alya was a little nervous as she waited for Kuze to arrive. What happened the night before was still fresh in her memories, and she was somehow unsure of how to act around him now. With Alya finally starting to come to terms with her feelings for Kuze, she's starting to see him in a different light, akin to those people in love who see the apples of their eyes in a filtered version. Still, Alya managed to act normally, although she noticed that Kuze wasn't acting like his usual goofy self. She thought that perhaps Kuze was upping his game so that he could best support her. During their physical education class, Kuze was accidentally hit by the volleyball so hard that he was literally knocked out. As Kuze later left the gym to get some fresh air, Alya joined him. She was genuinely concerned about him and acted nicer than normal, so Kuze also started to wonder why. Once they were ready to go back inside the gym, Kuze mustered up the courage to ask her about it, and she admitted that it was because he'd been acting unlike himself and was worried that something might be wrong with him. Kuze assured her that he was fine, and that he was just acting unlike himself because he missed breakfast and was actually able to get enough sleep last night. This made Alya upset, as last night she lost some sleep thinking about what happened between them. She also felt embarrassed for overthinking and being concerned about nothing. Then again, Alya was right all along. Kuze is still bothered by the fact that he chose someone else to support over Yuki, but there's no need to let Alya know about that. At least now, Alya is back into acting like she used to around him. After their classes ended for the day, Alya and Kuze went together to the student council office. Just as they left, they saw the members of the baseball and soccer teams in the hallway. To Kuze's surprise, he saw an unfamiliar, intimidating girl as he opened the door to the office. The girl turned out to be Chisaki, the student council vice president and Kanzaki's girlfriend. Kuze had heard rumors about her being called boss by some students, and now he knew why. She's the type to use her strength and intimidation to instill discipline. Soon after, the rest of the student council officers arrived. The meeting begins once Masha and Yuki have finally arrived and everyone is settled in. Kuze introduced himself as the new member in charge of general affairs. He also added that by next year he will be Alya's vice president as she runs for the student council president position. The meeting concluded with Kuze having been instructed to shadow Masha for the day as Yuki and Alya went to the arts club to discuss their upcoming exhibit. Seeing as it was Yuki herself who made some excuse to have Alya go with her, Kuze had a foreboding feeling that something was about to go down. On their way to the arts club, Alya asked Yuki if they could talk privately. There was no ill intention behind it. Alya just wanted to formally let Yuki know that Kuze and her will be running together against Yuki. And just like when Kuze told her about it last night, Yuki didn't make such a fuss about it this time either. Before they ended the conversation though, Alya wanted to ask Yuki if she had feelings for Kuze. As expected, Yuki mischievously tells her that she loves Kuze. In fact, she loves him more than she loves her mom and dad. Of course, Alya was taken aback by such a bold declaration, especially when Yuki started pressuring Alya about what she felt about Kuze. Despite herself, Alya managed to dodge directly answering the question. Yuki only lets her be when Alya says that although she and Kuze are just good friends, she will never let Yuki have him because he's hers. Meanwhile, back at the student council office, Kuze was surprised at how efficient Masha is when working, which is so unlike her personality. Chisaki is a total klutz with office work, although she's reliable regarding club and committee discussions. It just goes to show how everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. Everyone was having a tea break when Yuki and Alya came back. Kuze knew immediately that something had happened between them, seeing how Alya seemed upset over something while glaring at the innocently smiling Yuki. Later that afternoon, as Kuze and Alya were on their way home, they passed by the family restaurant they had gone to before. Kuze invited Alya to a meal, pointing out that they had to have a strategic meeting regarding the presidential elections. Inside the restaurant, Kuze just had to ask Alya if something had happened between her and Yuki, seeing as Alya ordered not one but two parfaits for herself. However, Alya's lips were sealed, and she told him she was just a bit tired and needed some sugar to get her brain to work again. Alya then asked Kuze if he and Yuki were dating. Kuze quickly denies it and assures her that it will never happen. He also warns her that Yuki isn't as prim and proper as she seemed. In fact, she's just messing with Alya and is actually having fun with her reactions. Anyways, getting down to business, Kuze honestly tells Alya that they have zero chance of defeating Yuki. That's how much of a strong contender she is. He then started explaining to her the process of the presidential elections and how the only chance they got against Yuki was if they used the same strategy as Kanzaki did during his time. That's to say, they have to work on a solid backstory or quality that would appeal to the students and eventually win their votes. For starters, they have to work on Alya's speech during the student council address. Then again, in Kuze's opinion, Alya just needs to be herself when giving the speech. After all, she's already perfect the way she is. Fast forward to the student council meeting the following day. Yuki finally introduced her running mate for the elections to everyone. Her name is Ayano, and she will also be in charge of general affairs along with Kuze. Seeing Kuze's reaction when he saw Ayano, it was obvious that this move from Yuki would put him and Alya in a bind. Who could this new girl be? Is she also a rival in love? We'll find out in the next episode. If you're just as curious, please like and subscribe. It would mean the world to us. Ayano had called out to Kuze to talk in private. It seems like Ayano works for Kuze's grandfather, and knowing that Kuze had decided to run against Yuki, his grandfather seems upset about it. But Kuze doesn't want to back down. In fact, he tells Ayano to let his grandfather know that if he's got any problems with what he wants to do, then he should go straight to him instead of just going through Yuki, like this. Despite the circumstances, Kuze assured Ayano that he was not supporting Alya because he had romantic feelings for her, and that even now, Alya is still the most important person to him. Shortly after, Ayano excused herself while leaving Kuze, feeling like he had somehow disappointed her. Later, during lunch break, Kuze was eating with his friends in their classroom. Takeshi excitedly brought out an idol magazine and asked Kuze who was his favorite among the idols. Kuze admitted that he just doesn't get idols, being the 2D otaku that he is. When prompted to choose either way, he chose someone who resembled Masha, although it wasn't, mainly because he had his eyes on her, or so he'd like to admit. Anyways, Kuze was holding the magazine when Alya arrived and scolded him for bringing a prohibited item to school when he was in the student council. Even when Kuze explained that it was Takeshi's, she did not let him off. Soon after, the three started discussing what type of girl Kuze would want to date. Things turned awkward after the characteristics that Kuze was looking for seemed to be the total opposite of Alya. Although Takeshi tried to improve things, he managed to worsen the situation. In the end, Alya, upset, confiscated the magazine. Meanwhile, Ayano met Yuki in a secluded room and reported on her conversation with Kuze. Ayano told Yuki that Kuze was still the person he idolized. Although her obsession seems to be borderline love in Yuki's eyes, Ayano assures her that it isn't something like that. Speaking of love, Ayano also tells her how Kuze declared that Yuki is still the most important person in the world to him. Yuki is so happy about this that she almost makes a scene. Their feelings and relationships, however, shouldn't matter in their race for the presidential elections. Although Alya doesn't look like she's got any chance against Yuki, the latter looks forward to how Kuze will turn the table. After all, Kuze is dubbed to be the greatest prodigy ever produced in their family, as well as someone who she could never win against. Later in the afternoon, Yuki and Alya were playing poker, and it seemed like Yuki was on a winning streak. Not only because Yuki is skilled at it, but also because it's just so easy to read Alya's face. Speaking of skills, the senior members of the student council complimented Ayano on her ability to sneak up on people. Ayano explained that she was trained by her grandparents, who had been serving Yuki's family as attendants. Soon after, Kuze and Masha were tasked to buy drinks for the members. On their way to the vending machine, the two seem to get some sort of connection, as they talk about the pains of being the older sibling who wants to spoil their younger sisters. Although Masha does what she does because she doesn't want to burden Alya, Kuze admits to hiding his capabilities because he doesn't want others to rely on him. Seeing as he seemed to be carrying something heavy, Masha didn't hesitate to comfort him. On another day, a girl named Sayaka approached Alya, wanting to talk. It's someone Kuze had mentioned before for being Yuki's rival during the presidential elections in middle school, which made Alya curious. In the middle of the school courtyard, Sayaka accuses Alya of doing some dirty tricks to nab Kuze from Yuki as his running mate. Before things get more heated, Kuze arrives and tries to mediate by explaining to Sayaka that there were no tricks involved and that he decided to side with Alya instead of Yuki himself. There was no backing down for Sayaka, who now thinks it was all Kuze's fault and suddenly challenged him to a student congress. Alya intervenes, insisting she should have a say since she's Kuze's running mate. Sayaka is clearly looking down on the two, especially on Kuze, who she had seen as a slacker all this time, and doesn't believe that he had any place in the presidential elections or the student council in general, even though it's a fact that he's already a member of the student council when it doesn't even seem like she was considered. Alya and Kuze were being briefed by Kenzaki about the topic for the student congress proposed by Sayaka. Turns out it's about including teachers in the screening process when adding new student council members. This was a direct attack on Kuze, who was selected because he was a vice president during his middle school years, and not because of his current merits. After all, it's not like the current Kuze is such a model student, isn't he? Kenzaki knew how difficult this could be, so he had to ask the two if they were serious about taking part in it, since there weren't really any merits involved. But Alya insisted that they had to, since not only would defeating Sayaka increase her reputation as a candidate, but Alya also had to make her apologize for looking down on Kuze as her partner. Kenzaki considered these points and finally decided to support them. In return, Yuki volunteered to make the flyers announcing the student congress to the student body, and even wished both Alya and Kuze the best. Later that day, Alya and Kuze brainstormed on the arguments they'd make at the student congress. When they were just about done, Alya asked Kuze if he was on bad terms with Sayaka, to the point that she'd make a big deal out of him being in the student council. And when Kuze said that he wasn't, Alya couldn't help but feel it was her fault for becoming his partner instead of Yuki. But instead of voicing it out, she just told Kuze she'd do her best at the student congress. And so, the day of the student congress arrived. As Alya and Kuze were about to enter the event hall, Miyamai greeted them, commenting that given their similar formal personalities, Alya and Sayaka would get along well. Once Miyamai went ahead, Kuze explained to Alya how despite their different personalities, Miyamai is in fact Sayaka's running mate and childhood friend. Also, it seems like Miyamai is actually quite popular among the student body, and although this is a bit concerning, it's not something that they should fear. Shortly after, they were finally on the stage. Alya tried to hype herself up, but the whispers from the student body were slowly getting into her. That was when Kuze suddenly asked her an embarrassing question about her cup size. Although he got called a perv, it was worth it since it made Alya less nervous. Shortly after Kenzaki's introduction, the student congress finally began. Sayaka was the first one to give her argument, and by the looks of things, she seemed to have the upper hand. But Alya also had a good counter. Even the answers she gave Sayaka on the cross argument were on point. When things started turning sideways for Sayaka, Miyamai used her influence to turn the tide and disrupt Alya's thought process. Fortunately, Kuze was there to rescue Alya as he took over for her. This time, Kuze made another sound argument by using Kenzaki as an example, although in the process Kuze had to subject his senior to friendly teasing. Nevertheless, it was good enough that Sayaka had no choice but to run away from the student congress. and indirectly admit defeat. Alya instinctively ran after her. Given how things turned out, Miyame had no choice but to raise the white flag, which marked the end of the student congress. Meanwhile, Alya caught up with Sayaka and realized that she was crying. Sayaka then admitted how she had thought that Yuki and Kuze were the perfect duo, and that seeing him with someone else just didn't sit right with her, which in turn fueled all the fuss. In the end, Sayaka had always known that the fault really fell on her and her selfish ideals. Miyame arrives not long after and asks Alya to leave, calming Sayaka down to her. Before she did, though, Alya tells Sayaka that although she doesn't know why Kuze decided to partner up with her, she'll make sure that Sayaka recognizes her as someone worthy of being his partner. Back at the event hall, Alya explains to Kuze the reason behind Sayaka's dissatisfaction. She then asks Kuze why he partnered up with her. Kuze admits that back in middle school, the only reason he agreed to partner up with Yuki was mainly due to guilt. But with Alya, it's different since this time he actually wants to work hard together with her. And that's why there's no reason for Alya to compare herself to Yuki in any way. When it was Kuze's turn to ask Alya why she was partnering with him, Alya smiled and answered in Russian. It seems like Kuze didn't understand it for real this time, which is why there isn't any translation in the subtitles, so let's just leave it as a mystery for now. Unless, of course, our viewers know the translation and could share it in the comments section. That would just be awesome. Also, please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Pretty pleased with a cherry on top? It was dinner time at Yuki's, and her grandfather was asking her about the student congress, giving his unwarranted opinion. He criticizes Sayaka for running away from the debate, which resulted in boosting Kuze's side. As if that wasn't enough toxic comment. The old man also pointed out that even though Yuki isn't as talented as her brother, she still can't lose to anyone. With a smile on her face, Yuki just says she'll do her best. After dinner, Yuki's mom showed concern for her well-being, although she seemed to struggle showing it. Fortunately, Ayano was there whose companionship was enough for Yuki. The next day, several students were congratulating Kuze for his performance at the student congress and ignoring Alya, who was right in front of them. Although Alya didn't seem to mind, Kuze took it upon himself to turn their attention to her. But when the students started to badmouth Sayaka for running away from the stage, Alya became upset and asked Kuze to talk at the student council office. Kuze understands that Sayaka getting ridiculed is bothering Alya, although he reminds her that they won fair and square on a student congress that they were just forced into doing in the first place. Nevertheless, Alya feels as if they didn't really win, although she also understood that it's to their advantage with Sayaka's reputation ruined like this. If it were all up to Kuze, he would just leave it as is, but since Alya wants to do it the hard way in the end, he decided to help her, which Alya was very grateful for. Suddenly, Kuze noticed a movement near Kenzaki's table and instinctively knew there were eavesdroppers in the room. Kuze did not want to expose them at first, but when Alya started acting like some heroine in a rom-com anime, which is exactly what this anime is, Kuze had no choice but to call out to Kenzaki and Chisaki. Otherwise, he and Alya would just be put in a more awkward position. Soon after Alya excused herself and realized she had almost done something super embarrassing, meanwhile, Kuze went to see Miyame and witnessed just how influential she is. When Miyame noticed him, they soon went somewhere to talk in private. Once alone, Miyame joked that Kuze came because he wanted to ask her out, which she wouldn't have minded. Although, of course, that wasn't really the reason why he came out to see her. Miyame's dating life aside, or the lack thereof, Kuze tells her that he wants them to do something about Sayaka's reputation that's been suffering ever since she ran away midway the student congress. After Miyame made sure that Kuze is perfectly aware that doing so is not in any way advantageous to him and Alya, she agreed. Plus, seeing as she's Sayaka's partner in the first place, it's really her responsibility to turn the tables around for them. Once Miyame leaves, Kuze calls out to Ayano and Yuki hiding under the desk, who admit that they were in the middle of a role play. At that moment, Alya suddenly appeared looking for him, and gets upset that he is with the others and leaving her out. Meanwhile, Miyame returns to her friends and immediately puts into action the plan that Kuze talked her into doing. Using her own devices, Miyame started a rumor that the reason why Sayaka left the student congress midway was because she found out about the moles that Miyame had planted in the audience and got mad at her. Well, it's not completely a lie, but let's just settle with that. Back to Kuze and Alya. Knowing that Alya is upset with him, Kuze suggested that the two of them study together, and hoped it would somehow appease her. Their little alone time, however, was cut short by the arrival of Yuki and Ayano, with Yuki being more than happy to act the annoying little sister role. Soon after, Masha appears and prepares some tea for everyone. While looking around the room, Masha discovers a book on hypnosis, which apparently was confiscated by Chisaki earlier. Masha then asked Alya to try it on her, but the little sister coldly refused, so Masha turned to Kuze, who easily gave in. And it seems like Kuze really is someone capable, because in just one try, he was able to utilize the book and managed to hypnotize not just Masha but also Alya. Having been left with two hypnotized young girls in their care, Yuki's naughtiness acts up, which leads to Masha and Alya being more unrestrained. But it seems like the subconscious interpretation Masha and Alya had of Yuki's instructions have become more literal to the point that they even started taking off their uniforms. Before things get more serious, the brother-sister duo tried to undo the hypnosis effect, but failed. Fortunately, Chisaki arrives and manages to undo it for them. As punishment for seeing something he shouldn't, Chisaki asks Kuze if he also wants to experience the special reset treatment, to which he vehemently rejects. Now, this feels more and more like a romantic comedy, doesn't it? Well, this is it for us, guys. We'll see you again in our next video. Bye-bye.